We know each other from Raven Housing Trust, where I was a project manager leading on a redevelopment of an ex-care home. And that was the first project that we'd assigned RenKap platform to conduct the site surveys for us. So that's where we first met. It would have been a very, very, very arduous process. And if I'm managing multiple sites, very, very difficult. So initially, you'd have to ensure that the consultants or the companies that you're approaching were actually on the list of approved consultants within the company to start with, to enable you to even obtain 3 or 4 quotations for each survey that's required. So getting them registered with the organization and doing their due diligence checks, that was a process in itself, and quite labor intensive in terms of paper. And then having to identify 3 contractors to get 3 quotes to show value for money. Um, and then selecting those contractors and then emailing them individually with a project brief, red line boundary, what our intentions are, what the survey is required for and our timeframes for each site. So if you had 10 sites, doing that 10 times. Um, and then going out to tender, pressing the go button, and then giving them a deadline within a week or 2 to reply back to us, and managing any emails or queries in between that time of the deadline. Again, you're talking another week or 2 or even 3 if those consultants are off on leave as well. And then identifying the quotes once they've come in, and identifying 3 quotes that offer value for money, and then presenting that back to the organization to demonstrate your value for money and who your recommendation is to go with. And then appointing the consultant for each survey that you need for each site, and then meeting them on site, walking them around. And then once we've agreed that, instigating a contract, and then conducting the RAMs, agreeing a date for the RAMs to be conducted, and then again the information being brought back to the organisation and being internally signed off, and then waiting for the reports to come back individually via email. Especially if you've got other emails coming in your inbox, it would really, really mount up. So reminding yourself via an Excel spreadsheet or something who you've contacted, deadlines you've given them, any queries they've had in between, um, and when you're expecting to have the quotations back, and then finally sifting through each quotation, um, and then the reports once they're appointed was very, very labour intensive indeed, and it would take a good month possibly, depending on how many sites you were managing and what stages they were at. If they were stage 1 or 2, it would make a big difference. So it's liaising with the contractor and maybe housing management, depending if it's an infill site or if it's an open site with access, um, meeting them on site, writing to the residents so they're aware of the new faces around the area, um, trying to pin the contractor down to a time. So you sort of linger around site if you need to provide access or, speak to the caretaker. So there's a lot of stakeholders involved. And then once they were provided access on site, you'd then ask for, 2 to 3 week turnaround for the surveys or reports, depending on how much detail that you need, and depending on their workload in terms of other projects that they're working on with other companies.
Mm.
Um, and sometimes those deadlines were missed, especially if you're busy doing other projects or other parts of your project. You may miss that deadline, and then you'd have to chase them up again, and then taking time to actually read through the reports. Whereas it was really helpful where RenKap were able to sort of traffic light the report at a very high level, so you could see if there are any items that you need to be aware of that were orange or red. Um, Otherwise, you'd have to read through each report and highlight those and then save them on the shared drive. I think depending on what your scope of service has been when you were appointing the contractor would basically reflect on how detailed the report would be. And if it's a very detailed report, then I would, create a risk register, just literally any high level bits of information that I've literally picked out from reading the report, I would note down, and then at the end of it, review the recommendation and then align that with my conclusion as to what needs to be done next. And if there are any details in the report that I didn't quite understand, then it'd be a further phone call. Or sometimes they'd walk you through the report. So that would be a presentation in itself, where they'd walk you through the report, and that gives you opportunity to ask any questions or queries that you had. Or passing on your project to somebody else, say you only deal with the early stages, for example, not quite delivery. If you're passing over at stage 3 or 4, you know, regurgitating that information back to your colleague and making sure they understand that there's some deadlines or there's further works needed on that particular survey. If there's bats and you're out of season, making sure that they're aware of what needs to be done and the timings surrounding that.
Yeah, brilliant. The also the cost as well, from my experience previously, sometimes you get all these recommendations back. Oh, you now need a bat survey. You now need a land contamination phase 2.
Mm.
Okay, could you have provided a quote, please? Um,
Yeah,
so then you got to go back. So talk me through that process. Once you have the recommendations, then what? Then what? You have to then go back out to get quotes again.
trying to obtain best value, but your recommendation would be to suggest to stay with the same company unless there's something that's gone wrong or they don't provide that additional service. But again, that's a whole another form of work that needs to be presented internally again and documented as well, and costed within your project
Mm.
budget. Um, maybe taking that out of contingency or what have you, but being aware of additional costs,
Yeah.
including that, will have a knock-on effect to your project costs. I think the experience of a project manager managing the surveys have to understand the mechanics behind it and understand the whole process of project management in construction and why we're having the surveys, why you're having stage 1, why you're having stage 2, and understand the site themselves. So it's having that, and even down to the report and title, understanding what items have been brought up within the report and title, just so you know the land, and understanding the development process, why we're having these surveys. There's a reason. It's not just to have it and then build a nice block of flats. There is a reason to know what's below and above ground in the development process, because that will impact what you're going to be developing, the foundation design, right through to when you're going to be submitting to planning. So having that clear understanding of the development process and the implications of the surveys and the findings and how that impacts how and what is going to be developed. They don't give enough, not they, some people don't give enough value to the early stages of development. They really don't. They just give value from stage 4 onwards. And that's all that matters. It will impact what happens on stage 4 onwards if you don't get the beginning right. It will have massive impacts on your cost plan, your budgeting, your appraisals, your revised costs, what's going to be built. You're making all these promises of we're going to build, 20 flats politically and socially to the community, and actually, once you've done further investigation, you can only build 5.
Mm.
And having that below ground and that information about the ground and the site is key, and it has to have importance. Otherwise, it's going to affect delivery on the other end. But some people don't understand you're actually kicking the can down the road. You're kicking the costs down the road, where it's going to get even more inflated. And how are you going to manage that? So try and get it right at the beginning. You've got to get the scopes of services right, so that needs to be done properly and detailed. And depending if it's stage 1 or stage 2 surveys, will impact the length of time and duration. I think you're looking at least a month if you're doing everything thoroughly and properly. At
Mm.
least a month. The scope of service, identifying who your contractors are going to be that you're going to approach, defining the brief, the red line boundary, supplying that information to them, um, sending out the email, with a deadline of a return within a week or 2, to be fair, having the return of the information, of the quotes, sifting through those, presenting that internally, and then appointing the contractor to conduct the survey, that single survey for you, letting them go off and do the work, and then that's another 2 to 3 weeks, providing the report depending on their workload, and then sending it back to you and then reading through it. You can't just do that necessarily in one day if it's very detailed. You have to sometimes reread it twice or three times. And you may have queries from that. So it could be 4 to 5 weeks. I was initially very skeptical because I was used to working through and getting the quotes myself and doing that labor intensive work. I was used to doing it. Doesn't mean it's the right way of doing things or the most efficient. So when the platform was introduced to me and I was asked to use it to conduct the site surveys, I was very, very skeptical. How is this going to work? And when I uploaded the red line boundary for the site, and provided the postcode and the other information to RenKap and pinged that over, and then ticked the shopping basket of surveys that I needed, which were mostly stage 1 surveys, I was very shocked at how quickly the the quotes came back for the surveys. So literally one email of work or uploading online, and then I got all this information back. And then I found the RenKap platform a really helpful tool. It became a project management tool, part of my toolbox from when I was working, because I was able to go online and look at the reports in one place, easily accessible. Secondly, the traffic light system was really, really helpful to me to give me a high level summary of what key reports needed further work or additional surveys or information to look out for. And that helped me project plan my project in terms of when I could move on to stage 2, or when I should factor in the additional surveys that were needed, or when we were likely to you know go to planning or submit to planning. It helped me plan and progress my project in a much more efficient way. So I was very impressed once I actually had used the platform of how easy it was to use. It wasn't hard at all, and how quickly I was able to get all the information back. I didn't have to contact each contractor to get a quote. It was already done. I did the brief once. I did the red line boundary upload once, and that was it. Ping, it was gone. It's highlighting the further additional works that was needed. So, the bat survey revealed there was one bat, and we needed to do a further bat survey at a particular time of the year the following year because we were just out of season, and that was amber. And then there was a quote for that additional survey to be done, and that, well, I could have missed that very easily, or not understood the implications of not doing the next survey on time, or it's just, that was a really good tool that helped me do my risk register in terms of running the project, because that was a key element. And that information came up in our design meetings as a project progressed, and that was always highlighted on our project risk register. So I found that really helpful. The risk register, that provided an excellent overview as to what the risks were for the project. So the bat survey, that identified that there was one bat living at the site, and it recommended the time of year the following year to conduct the additional survey that was required, because it has to be done at a specific time of the year, a particular season. And it also gave me a fee proposal um, next to it, so I could budget within my cost, within my appraisal, what the additional cost was going to be, and factor in, when that additional survey needs to be conducted, and then it was highlighted on my risk register. So having that amber note highlighted on the platform was invaluable and became part of my project management tool. It helped me, plan my project in terms of, moving on to the next stage of, detailed design and what additional surveys that were required. I was able to plan that in, and also planning any risk factors, and you know clearly predict when I could submit to planning, and also manage my finance. I knew that I had an additional cost for additional survey, and I already knew from the outset what that proposal was, and I could manage my budget accordingly. Along the way of working with RenKap, if I had identified any improvements that would help the platform or help us as project managers work more efficiently, you've always listened and conducted it. So where I had identified at the early stages, RAMs that still needed to be done. I mean, do you include that in your scope of services or etc.? You've incorporated that now, so that was good to see. I think where we're trying to spread the word as to how good RenKap is and how useful it is as a platform and a project management tool, and to help us with our small sites especially, it would be lovely to see a live demonstration. So if in the meeting there was somebody had a red line boundary, or even if you had an example of a red line boundary, you could literally upload it and say, look, within 2 seconds I've got 3 quotes, here they are. And it'd be even more personable if the organization had a red line boundary of a previous site that they'd worked on or a current site that they worked on. Then you could literally use it as a live demonstration, because people like to see things in real time.
Mm.
You
Yeah.
can really see, because just talking about it and walking through it, it's good to see, but when you see an actual red line boundary that your organization is working on or your team's working on, and oh look, you've just provided us with 3 quotes sort of for free, look at that. It would be amazing. But so for Waltham Forest, I wasn't allowed to even upload until procurement and legal had approved. But if you in a demonstration to the team had said, you know here is I don't know, one, if I gave you a site, a red line boundary for one site that I'd worked on, or was I was looking at, in the demonstration you could say, well, this is one of the sites that Natalie's working on for the small sites program, and look, there's 3 quotes for your agricultural surveys, because I
Yeah.
wouldn't be allowed to upload that until I've been given internal approval. But if Mira and everyone had seen that, they'd be like, oh, we've already got 3 quotes for that. Fantastic. Okay. So it really does work. It just brings it into reality.
Yeah.
It makes it
Yeah.
seem real. I wasn't allowed to, but
Yeah.
if you knew I was working on red brick car park and you quickly done a red line boundary yourself,
Yeah.
let's just say, and you uploaded it, you could say, oh, I know that your organisation is looking at this particular car park. I've just done a rough outline of a red line boundary, and here's an example of a quotation for arboricultural survey. I would recommend RenKap to other parties. I think it's extremely important to understand the value of your site surveys for stage 1, stage 2. And also, as a senior project manager, the value in using this platform as part of your project management tools toolkit is really, really important, very important, and it'll help you work very efficiently, especially when you're managing multiple sites. It
Yeah.
cuts out the work of having to do all of the labor-intensive emailing and following up and chasing to individual contractors. This one platform will do it all for you. I would say use the RenKap site. There are different options in terms of packages that you offer, and I know that you can use the site to upload 10 sites for free, to see if you could find any use or value in using this platform in terms of obtaining surveys. And just by uploading a few sites as an example, or a test site, you will immediately see the value when you obtain the quotes immediately in one click of a button. You can't get any quicker than that. And you can literally immediately update your appraisal if needs be with new figures. How fantastic is that? In one hour. Once you capture people, if you've got a meeting actually booked in with anybody, any organization, you've captured them. And I guess it's making best use of that, which you do, walking them through the platform, the benefits of using the platform, the surveys. But even if you had an interview of somebody working in another local authority or housing association where they've actually used it, and like I said, if you could get to know one or two of their sites that the organisation is currently working on, if you upload that red line boundary, a rough one, and say, look, what surveys would you be interested in for this particular site, you could literally upload it and say, look, I've got you 3 agricultural quotes already,
Mm.
just within our session here.